One last thing I want to ask you about go ahead, Thomas.
Where's our Circa Sport shirts? Man, I want to. We're t-shirt guys. We love sport.
Thomas, I'm gonna go get you some when we go to Vegas. Our friend Aaron, the guy that runs all promotions there, he has not sent us shirts. Manscaped did send us shirts. They weren't as good of a sponsor as Circa, but they did send us shirts and underwear and things to shave the face. By the way, I know what everybody commented on my haircut last week. I do think for somebody who doesn't get one very often, they always do turn out well. I do need to get haircuts more often because the feedback has been good. Speaking of haircuts, Josh Jacobs has been asked to take one by the Raiders relative to where he thinks his market's going to be. See how that works, Thomas? And so Jacobs is sitting out training camp. Chris Jones is sitting out training camp. These are two, if you go by like, other than Patrick Mahomes, like Chris Jones is the best player on the Chiefs last year. Mm-hmm. I think other than Devontae Adams, Josh Jacobs was the best player on the Raiders last year. As when you're a team builder and one of your cornerstone players, one of your best players on the team is sitting out, and we don't know where these negotiations are going, all the time. But when your best player is sitting out, kind of what's going through your mind, and are you at a constant contact with the agent, or is it something where you kind of like give it a few days? Like, how does that end up working?
No, I think you're not in constant contact. I mean, after the initial conversation and the agitation that the player does not, appear in the building, it becomes a little bit tenuous, and you get a little agitated because ultimately, when you're building a team and you're thinking about everyone being there, putting their asses on the line, you get a little agitated because you think, look, this is what we need to be a championship team. We need to all pull in the same direction. That said, everyone understands, the players in the locker room understand when sometimes these guys run into these situations. Some of the lower paid guys don't necessarily get it, but most of the players empathize with their teammates. Management, of course, does not always empathize or sympathize with the team, with the player, right? They just want him in. They want him working with the team. They want him sending messages. This guy, Josh Jacobs, obviously is very, very talented. We know that. He can kick butt at so many levels. I mean, as I understand, his desire to come back or not come back, I mean, obviously that's not what's going to happen. Josh McDaniel, as you know, I know him from New England. I mean, he's a principled guy in the sense, from the standpoint of making a decision on someone and not vacillating on it. He and Ziegler, the way that they're approaching this right now, will be interesting to see how it plays out. Look, Josh has never been, Josh, even back in his collegiate days, he had a little bit of attitude to him, right? I heard stories about him coming back, getting in trouble. Something happened, coming back the next day. I don't know if you ever heard that story where he had a piece of duct tape over his mouth and just sat in the meetings. He's just, he's got an air to him and an attitude to him that is what it is. But he is a really good football player. So, look, I'll be really interested to see how this plays out. But what do you do when it's a situation when it's your one of your very best players, if not your best player?
Well, I think about with running backs, particular, like we talk about what, and this is an interesting thought because it's true about Chris Jones too. The player, of course, wants to capitalize on what just happened. Right? When you're Chris Jones, you were the best defensive player in all of football, modulo a couple other guys possibly, and you won a Super Bowl, and the team probably doesn't win the Super Bowl without you. If you're Josh Jacobs, you led the league in rushing. If you're Saquon Barkley, let's say, and they've resolved that, but if you're Saquon Barkley, you're one of the most productive players in the league last year at your position. You're maybe the best player on your own team. Go back a year. A year ago, Chris Jones is battling to get that 10th sack to get $1 million bonus. He was a good, not great defensive tackle in 2021. Josh Jacobs was so kind of middling that they didn't even exercise his fifth-year option as a first-round pick. And Barkley is so injured and kind of broken down that there were people, and like I'm not joking, there were people who mistook Lorenzo Booker for him in games because they had similar numbers and similar builds. And a year later, they're the contract year is undefeated, and they're of course asking for how they were in 22, when the truth might be more of an average of those two types of players. And how does that, like, I know for a fact that that's the issue in a lot of cases, especially for Jones. Like, how does that, like, how do you convey that to how, it's hard for me to imagine you going to an agent being like, we love Chris, for example, and he was amazing for us last year. If you broaden the scope out a little bit, he might not be that great that next year. And so we want to pay him for kind of what we think he's going to be rather than who he's been. That's a tough conversation to have.
It's not an easy conversation to have. But again, make no mistake about this. As a general manager, you're sitting down with the head coach. You're sitting down sometimes when it's a dusty situation, both words used. You sit down with your owner and you decide how you're going to approach and how you're going to affect, how it's going to affect the contracts of other players. There are so many layers to this that it's not that easy just to have an agent pipe back at you and say something that you think is quite honestly just short-sighted, because we do know our organization better. We know the direction of our organization much better than anyone. I'm talking about a general manager and a head coach and an owner, of course, where appropriate. So I've gotten in many of those discussions and they're not easy. Sometimes you want to hang up. I made a real effort to keep my relationships with the agents in a good place. But believe me, there were some that were very, very acrimonious. And for me, they were forever, I think, scarred. But there was a line the other day with someone: you come to the table with money, you'll always heal. I think it was Mike Lombardi who said recently, like, it's a bunch of crap. Everyone's talking about this being a pain in the ass between the GM and these agents. The next deal you do, when you lay big money down on the table for them, they're coming back with a smile. So